Greetings and welcome to Conversations at Noon on the Connecticut Freedom Trail. I'm Tammy Denise. In August of 1995, the Connecticut Freedom Trail was established by the General Assembly to recognize the struggle for freedom within the Black and African American communities. These were done through the recognition of sites which opened officially August 1996 with 50 sites, museums, private homes, ancient burying grounds, and plaques. These sites are under the auspice of the Amistad, Underground Railroad, anti-slavery, abolition, civil rights, and the sites of consciousness. To date, we have approximately 170 sites and still growing. The Connecticut Freedom Trail is under the oversight of the Amistad Committee, which was established in 1839. Today, we are going to talk about the Black Heritage Trail in New London, and our guests today is Curtis K. Baldwin and Nicole Thomas. Curtis K. Baldwin was born and raised in New London, Connecticut, and is a former city councilor for the city of New London, Connecticut, where he chaired the council committee for economic development. Curtis was instrumental in many new initiatives, such as developing a state-of-the-art $30 million community rec center. In addition, he curated a 15-marker Black History walking trail and formed a cultural commission for the city. He has a degree in marketing and hospitality management from Johnson & Wales University and currently runs his creative agency and works as a lead account executive at Indeed. Curtis's portfolio included international associations such as the National Society of Black Engineers and Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers. Nicole Thomas, she took an interest in local history almost 20 years ago after her mother purchased a historic home with an 1895 plaque. In her spare time, Nicole can be found digging through historic archives, aiming to find out more about New London's most fascinating stories. She is a native of New London, and she also works for the Hempstead House as the assistant director. It is a set of historic homes from 1678 and 1759, respectively. Before we go into our program, let's do a quick housekeeping. If you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. We will get to as many as we possibly can. And also, please remember to fill out our survey. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know what other subjects you would like to hear. So now I will turn it over to our distinguished guests, Curtis and Nicole. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, Curtis, I'm sorry, but you're muted.
I appreciate that. I work remotely for like the past 10 years, and that is the biggest rookie mistake, and here I am making it, so kudos to me. But what I was trying to say is, hello, everyone. I'm Curtis Goodwin, and I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Nicole Thomas, and we are extremely excited to be here now that I'm not on mute. So I'll start by saying I am not a researcher. I am a curator. I am a planner. I am the inspiration for the Heritage Trail, and I am the visionary behind scaling it. I'm joined by Nicole, who happens to be one of our local researchers, and much of the reason why I myself got into local history and just Black history in general. So in 2019, just to give you a little bit of backstory, in 2019, I successfully ran for city council. And as you know, it's not easy. It's not easy to be a Black male running for politics in this climate, or in any climate, if you will. But because there's not enough of us, I was very inspired to run to try to be a voice for those that do not have a voice in politics. Prior to running for council, I needed a treasurer. So I decided I'd write Nicole on Facebook, who I hadn't talked to in a long time, but I just knew she'd be the person for the job. She was a woman of color. She was into local history. She was into Black history. She was a familiar face for me. And she's just someone who I thought and knew would inspire me. Wasn't quite sure how she would go on to inspire me, but Nicole accepted the role as my treasurer. As being my treasurer, we'd have conversations about obviously my treasury, my run for local council, and just how things are going. So naturally, we're going to connect. One of those things I was most excited about connecting about was local history. So myself and Nicole would frequent the vaults of City Hall, which I know you're probably surprised a city councilor is visiting City Hall. And she would show me incredible documents depicting decades of Black accounts, transactions, and stories. And I immediately became fascinated with the stories, fascinated with the history, and just fascinated with this vault that has decades and decades and decades of just all types of historic documents that we were able to kind of go through. So just before elections, at this time, I'm pretty much a nervous wreck. I have to admit, I'm a nervous wreck. I'm asking myself questions. I'm starting to feel the pressure. Will I win? Will I get enough votes? Can I fulfill these shoes? Is it me who's supposed to be in this time right now, asking questions to God and just of myself? So during that time, as you can see, I'm a mess. But anyway, I was invited by Nicole to attend a lecture by a local researcher who you'll see pictured here with his hand raised. You'll see Nicole in the second row with her daughter there. By a local researcher, or one of our head researchers, Tom Schultz, who was doing a story about Ichabod peas. I didn't know Tom, nor did I know Ichabod peas at that time. I was one of the few Black people in the audience that was fortunate to learn about this local hero. So a little bit about Ichabod Pease. Ichabod Pease was a man born into slavery and a one-time fugitive in New London after escaping his captor. Pease had fled bondage in 1779 after his slaveholder made plans to move south. That move would have taken Pease away from his wife, Rosa. He would spend the next 2 years in hiding before being recaptured. Pease would eventually gain his freedom in about 1794, and in 1794, his wife, Rosa, was freed 2 years later. The couple lived in New London and attended St. James Church. At a time when the nation and the city, our city in New London, were divided over the growing abolitionist movement, by 1835, New London was strongly anti-abolitionist, and there was a growing resentment against schooling Black kids with white children in the classrooms. So what does Pease do? Pease comes forward and he presents a plan. He presents a solution for the Black children who at this time are being asked not to theoretically come to the school children. So he would invite these kids, to come to his home, where he would set up a school for the first Black school for children in his home. My apologies, my site froze. All right, so during the story that I'm hearing about Pease, it inspired me. So it taught me something about resilience. It taught me tenacity. It taught me about the legacy that we have to leave as Black people. It taught me about creating futures for our youth. It taught me about giving back to community. And it just reminded me at a time when I needed it most, when I was running for city council, just what it takes to run, what that privilege means. And I just kind of thought, if Pease at the age of 81 could start the first Black school for Black children here in New London, how could I not, at my tender age in my early 30s, not run for city council during a time where I did not have to face abolition, where I did not have to face being enslaved or running from my captive? And that level of tenacity that I learned through this man was just something that carried with me to today. So I decided during that time frame that I would honor him, and I did just that, and we'll get into a little bit about that in just a second. But this slide right here depicts collaborating for success. A lot of times I get asked, how were we able to embark on this trail? What were the people involved? What were the resources that you pulled together? So myself, I was a city councilor at the time, so I was able to kind of spearhead making sure this happened, making sure it was funded. A partnership with the city of New London. I had the full backing of our city council at the time. I also had the full backing of the mayor, which came with the mayor's staff and city staff. Our New London Cultural District that I would found right after I became a city councilor. So I started the first New London Cultural District here in Connecticut. With them, we were able to keep this going. So we went from that one marker of me being able to honor Pease and to be able to give him his flowers, if you will, to us leading the way to 16 markers that we currently have today. And we'll get into a few more of the stops when I present to you, Nicole. We also have local researchers involved because, as you know, I'm not a local researcher. I'm a local researcher in training, if you will. So we have Nicole Thomas, who we'll hear from up next. We have retired state's attorney, Lonnie Braxton. We have Laura Natush, who is the director of New London Landmarks. We have Tom Schultz, who I attended his brilliant presentation on Ichabod Pease, which would lead to the inspiration to this. The Mashantucket Pequot tribal members, and many, many more stakeholders and community members. So as you can see, it's a real community investment, which is why it makes this trail so profound, because that intersectionality of just the diversity of the people that are involved. So as I said, we have over 16 stops. Here's just the stops listed here. So you have the Amistad Pier, you have the Amistad Rebellion, you have Adam Jackson, 11 Hempstead Street, you have 66 Hempstead Street, you have 73 Hempstead Street, you have Shiloh Baptist Church, so one of our first Black churches, Linwood Bland, you have the Fayweathers, The Wife of Hercules, the Ancient Burial Grounds, which is one of my favorites, the Hempstead Street Ichabod Peas, Frederick Douglass of Darts Hall, which is currently right behind the Day newspaper, which is our local newspaper company. We have Hotel Bristol, 38 Green Street, and then to walk that tour, it's roughly about 42 to 52 minutes, depending on how fast you walk. And then the driving tour, which you would add 3 more stops, would be Antoine Descent, Spencer Lancaster, and Robert Jacklin at Mahan Park. So we've already gone to the Ichabod Peas, which is the first stop on that tour. So wanted to take you to a second stop on the tour, which is Living History being honored. And I just wanted to play a short video for you.
On Thursday afternoon, New London City Councilor Curtis Goodwin and Felix Reyes, director of the city's Office of Development and Planning, unveiled a plaque outside the home of Spencer Lancaster, the first Black elected official in the city's history.
When you're given a talent, don't bury it. Use it. And that's what I try to do all my life. Use my talent to get something better for everybody. Now, I look at this outing right now. This is New London. This is New London.
The plaque is part of a new Black Heritage Trail that Goodwin was inspired to create after learning about Ichabod Peas, a former slave who started a school in his home at age 81.
So what does he do? He decides that he's going to educate Black children here in the city of New London. How on earth did I not hear about Ichabod Peas growing up in school? This is a disservice to the children of all colors growing up in the school system.
A plaque honoring Peas was erected near the site of his school, the first of 15 plaques that now stand around the city.
If there's this one story that I wasn't told growing up in school, there has to be more stories. Of course, there are more stories.
The researchers who brought to light these stories led a tour of some of the sites on Thursday evening.
In 1845, it was perceived to be very difficult for Black folks to buy houses. Nobody wanted to sell houses to Blacks. So Civilian Haley, who was a painter by trade, he was an abolitionist. He was active in the New London abolitionist movement. And he basically put his money where his mouth is. And he came and he built 5 houses here. And he sold them at cost to free Blacks at a time when no one was doing that.
You really cannot talk about Black history without talking about the history of Black churches. And in New London, Shiloh Baptist Church is the first Black church to be incorporated.
And this plaque honors Mr. Bland for the things he did, not for people of color, not for just New London. He did them for America.
Our Adam Jackson, who you're going to see his plaque unveiled tonight, who was enslaved here at this house, didn't get to tell enough of his own story. And to date, we don't know where Adam Jackson is buried. But Adam Jackson, if I have nothing else to say from here, we plan to find you. The work's not over. Black history is American history.
The historical markers are spread out over just a few miles, but they span some 300 years. Thursday's unveiling tied together the past and present in one location.
Understand one thing, that you're standing on the ground that a man worked for over 40 years of his life as a slave, and that another man is sitting here in that spot today who has brought us this far. So if you think that change cannot take place, does not take place, clap and cheer Mr. Lancaster. Because he embodies that which we all should aspire to.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Nicole, but I think you couldn't have said it better in terms of just putting that call out on, national news saying, Adam Jackson, if you can hear me, or if anyone can hear me, we will find you. And then you heard some of our other local researchers saying, the work is not done. We're honoring someone who has passed away and who has paved the way with a living person who has also paved the way for someone like myself. So to be able to have that intersectionality and to be a part of that is just truly, truly a blessing. I can't tell you how much I am proud of our project, of our researchers, of our community, and just being able to show other communities what it's like to be able to take back our stories and allow the people whose stories that we are telling to be able to tell those stories themselves. So I'm honored to introduce Nicole, who will indulge you in a few more stops along the Black Heritage Tour, starting with Adam Jackson.
Yes, thank you guys for having me. And it is a fascinating accomplishment to be able to be a part of something like this, to have, spanning from Adam Jackson's time, which starts, around the 1700s, a little bit before that, because his parents' story does start up, to today, where there's actual living history, and we have other people that are still around that can and hopefully will be honored in their lifetime. So it is a beautiful thing. You are looking at the plaque of Adam Jackson. Now, I work at the Hempstead Houses. I've been there for about 5 years now. And that is Adam Jackson's plaque. Adam Jackson was born into chattel slavery around 1700 to John and Joan Jackson. Now, John Jackson, Adam's father, was brought over from the West Indies around 1686, and by 1700 he had actually gained his freedom, which is an amazing feat for an enslaved man back in that time. Not very common at all. But John, unfortunately, was considered to be of the weaker variety of slaves, and what that meant was, code word, troublemaker. He wasn't putting up with their stuff. So Adam's family does have a pretty fascinating story. The first time we hear about Adam, well, first of all, let me back up. There is a woman named Allegra de Bonaventura who wrote a book around 2013 called For Adam's Sake. And she came to the Hempstead Houses to write her college papers. And as she's going through this diary that spans from 1711 to 1758, so a period of 47 years, she continues to come up across this name of the name Adam. And she's kind of trying to figure out, like, who is this person? Eventually, she comes across the day where Joshua Hempstead purchases Adam Jackson. And so she knows that he is enslaved. The first time we hear about Adam Jackson in Joshua Hempstead's diary is in October of 1725. Right there, you're looking at the Hempstead Houses on what is my left, and the garret where Adam Jackson would have slept on the right-hand side. And we hear about him in 1725 through a witness in the court documents, where Adam Jackson himself mentions that John and Joan Jackson are my parents. It is very interesting to be able to hear of somebody's descendancy, because a lot of times, and we tend to think, slavery in the North was very different from slavery in the South. And one of the differences was that they tended to be closer. I get a lot of questions about why Adam did not run away from the area. He was a third generation New Londoner, just like Joshua Hempstead was. And his family was less than 4 miles away. So his mother had been continuously enslaved. And then for some time around 1703, she had gained her freedom. And then by 1710, she was re-enslaved. She does later end up free, but it takes a lengthy court case where John Jackson, Adam's father, is going back and forth to the courts and fighting for them. And in fact, at one point, John Jackson actually steals his family away from one of the islands, and they know that it was John Jackson and John Rogers who was one of the enslavers, because who else was kidnapping back this enslaved woman and her children at night? John Jackson goes all the way up to Massachusetts fighting for his family. And eventually he wins. Which is very uncommon for that type of time. And so, at that time, there were the Pardis laws, where the children would follow the direction of the mother. And if the mother was enslaved, the children would have remained enslaved. So Adam had been, at this time, moved on to the Fox family farm with his sister Miriam. And they had been separated when they were younger. Joan would come back and forth, and she would feed her, she would nurse her children. And it breaks my heart to think of Joan walking those 4 miles back and forth to take care of her own kids, because she had to leave them behind when she had gained her freedom. But we unfortunately don't have much about Adam's life when he was very, very young. We do know that he stayed on Samuel Fox's property until around the age of 27, when Joshua Hempstead does purchase him, and that was in September of 1727. And then Joshua Hempstead mentions that Adam comes to live with him on that particular day in the diary. So then we get kind of an insight into Adam's life. And for a very long time, while Joshua and Adam are living in the same house, Adam was enslaved at Joshua Hempstead's property for a period of 30 years. And so for the beginning of time, Joshua Hempstead was also a third generation New Londoner. So in the beginning, you hear a lot of, I did this and Adam helped. And as Joshua Hempstead ages, you hear a lot of, Adam did this and I helped, because Adam was a little bit younger than Joshua. And his forced labor really opened up the window for Joshua Hempstead to be able to do all of the things that he did. So Adam's daily life, he was an animal husbandman. So he knew how to tend the animals. Joshua Hempstead's wife had passed away years prior, and she had left her young children to Joshua to raise. But thankfully for him, Adam was in the house, and there would be other women that would come over and they would help, nurse the children and help raise the children. But the two grandsons of Joshua, he had two grandsons. His son Nathaniel had passed away. He had two grandsons who essentially he was given custody of, and they came to live with him and pretty much stayed with him. And Adam helped to raise those boys and help them in all of these things Joshua would not have had access to. He was, a gravestone letterer, justice of the peace, a legislator. He was pretty much a jack of all trades, Joshua Hempstead was. And if it wasn't for Adam's forced labor, he would have never been able to do all of the things that he did. So Adam would work on the farm. He would work, and he was free to go to Joshua's property, which was about in Stonington, if you're familiar with it, a couple miles away. Adam was free to entrusted enough to go over there on his own and take care of things. So that, that was speaking to how trusted Adam was. He was working unsupervised all the time, taking the boys, training them up. Adam does continue to have a relationship with his parents and his family. He does see his siblings from time to time, but not on a really consistent basis. He was most close to his sister Miriam, who ends up marrying and moving up to the Norwich area. And then his mother Joan passes away I think in the 1730s, I want to say. And then John Jackson actually stays alive for some period of time and is working alongside his son. There is much more to Adam's story. I know we have a limited amount of time, so I don't want to delve too much into it. What you're looking at on the screen right now is the webpage for the Black Heritage Trail for Adam Jackson's story. It tells you about the house. There's a page for the diary entry the day that Adam was purchased and the space that he would have slept in the garret. We've actually slept in the garret a number of times. From a man named Joseph McGill from the Slave Dwelling Project, he comes down and hosts events at the Hempstead houses. So I've slept in that space, and in June it's okay, but for the most part it's very uncomfortable. So it's hard to imagine Adam just sleeping up there and trying to maintain. He would have to get up as soon as the sun was up, and sometimes even before, and he would work long into the night. So again, if it wasn't for Adam's forced labor, Joshua would have never been the things that he could have been. Eventually, Adam does end up with his freedom after Joshua passes away. Joshua Hempstead is pretty interesting because he switches up a little bit. When John Jackson is an aged man, in those days, it was illegal to free your enslaved person and just let them roam about and not care for them, because then everybody else would have had to pay for them. Joshua Hempstead does go up against the Rogers family and tells them that you have to take care of John Jackson. You can't just let him, be an aged man and just roaming around. They have to take care of him. Interestingly enough, Joshua does not set Adam free when he passes away in 1758. And Adam does eventually acquire his freedom. We do believe that he may have gotten that from Joshua's son, John. We don't have any particular documentation, but we do know that John Hempstead ends up taking up the diary afterwards, and a few short, entries, but Adam does end up on the tax rolls as a free man, aged about 64, and then we don't see him anymore. So it is safe to believe that Adam may have passed away. We're not entirely sure, but that's kind of the story that we have for Adam Jackson. So hopefully you'll come to the house and get to hear more about that particular story. Now on to the Ancientist Burial Ground. This is one of my favorite sites. I get asked a lot which one is my favorite site on the Black Heritage Trail, and I do have to say that it is Hempstead Street, and I do mean the entire street. And this is just because all of the sites, a good majority of the sites are on Hempstead, and there's so many connections. But right now you're looking at the sign of the town's Ancientist Burial Ground. The burial ground itself was laid out in 1652, and right around the corner from that was the town's ancient meeting house. And so that was the original town center. On the screen too is a memorial plaque to Florio Hercules, and it says wife of Hercules, governor of the Negroes, and she passed away in April of 1749, age 60. Interestingly enough, with this particular plaque, we didn't know much about this Hercules, governor of the Negroes. However, the Office of the Black Governors had started in 1740 in Lynn, Massachusetts. We do believe that there were some celebrations that were going on prior to that, but they may not have called it the Black Governors. But we do know that it was officially established in 1740 Lynn, Mass. The Black Governors did not hold statewide office. In fact, they would go up with the colonies, colonial governors, to Hartford or wherever they were holding those particular elections. And they would go after, they would be voted in. Somebody had to have some prominence. They would have had to own a pig. They would preside over legal matters in the Black community, and they had ceremonies. They followed more of a matrilineal, line of performances. Back in Africa or the West Indies, it would have been the women that would have been in charge and would have been on top of celebrations and ceremonies, and they would have been the people that were in charge, not the men. And so they did follow that there. However, here it was a totally different story. And they maintained, organization within the Black community. They do say that it was a subtle form of slave control. But honestly, the Black people were mocking the colony's white governors. That's kind of what ended up happening. And so, it's an interesting story. A lot of people are not very familiar with it. Up on your screen now is a list of all of the Black governors that we have found so far, and some that other people have found. As of 1740s, though, Hercules had not initially been listed on this documentation. So I had to reach out to another researcher who was doing a presentation and let her know that Hercules is missing from 1749. Florio and Hercules were not only separated in life, but in death. For a long time, we did believe that Hercules may have passed away before Florio and that we just didn't know where he was buried. It turns out during a presentation, or right before a presentation a few months ago, we were able to discover that Hercules probably was right around the corner from Florio and was living in the Prentice household. So it's interesting to think about that they could have been so close yet so far. There's a book called Black Roots that is essentially like the Black History Bible for Southern New England. And it tells a lot of those stories. So it's a fascinating book. If you don't have a copy, I would recommend getting one if you're interested in the Black history here. But the Black governors were people who really commanded respect. They would have had to be great orators, people that were very well spoken. The people that owned them would have had to be of some prominence. You're looking at the site for William Lanson, and he was a fascinating guy, as it says on the screen. He was a contractor, engineer from Little Guinea, political activist. He went through quite a bit, and he actually has a connection to the Prudence Crandall School with his niece, which I won't really get into because it's a much longer story and you want to tell that one properly. But it was a really fascinating thing. They didn't enforce any laws or anything like that, but they did have a social standing within their own people, and it was really interesting for the day and the time because some people would have owned guns sometimes, and that's something that you don't see often. We also had the Bassett family. If you were able to look into some of the documentation, and they were on the list of the Black governors as well, there was like a familial line of Black governors in the Bassett family, and they kind of held that pretty well together for a number of years. The office of the Black governor ends around the 1840s. And so it lasts for a very short period of time, just as I guess as short a time as Whaling would have here. But the Black governors is really a story that a lot of people are not very familiar with. And I hope with given this type of presentation and others that we'll give in the future, just solely focused on that we'll be able to give you, more, definitely a lot more than that. So, and now about 73 Hempstead Street, excuse me while I switch this. 73 Hempstead Street is one of the most fascinating, I think, in fact, the most fascinating site on the Black Heritage Trail. It encompasses many, many years. Since about the 1840s, 73 Hempstead Street has played a very significant role in the Black community, from David Ruggles' sister having lived there, John Parkus. Civilian Haley actually ended up building those homes. It used to be Hempstead property. That whole street, in fact, is called Hempstead Street, and it was Hempstead property at one point. And the Hempstead sisters, I initially thought sold the land to Civilian Haley, but he did end up buying it from somebody else. He built the houses for $700 at cost on the land itself. The plots of land itself was worth at least $700. And what he did was he bought the land, he built the houses and sold them to free Blacks at cost at a time when definitely nobody in New London was doing it. And probably not many in the country were doing that at all. It was one of 5 houses built by abolitionist Civilian Haley. He was a painter by trade, as you heard in the video from earlier. Haley purchased, all of those and sold them. So there were a number of Black families that had lived there first. We're actually kind of looking into adding the plaque of one of the first Black families that lived there, because they do have Civilian Haley's name on them. Usually they're whoever built and or occupied the homes. But this particular home was first purchased by John Parkus in 1845, and the house remained in the family until about 1926. Parkus ends up marrying Lavinia Ruggles, and she was the sister of the famed freedom fighter David Ruggles, who was the founder of the New York Committee of Vigilance. If you're not familiar with David Ruggles, there are lots of good programs coming up about him. I won't spoil it, but really a fascinating man. We hear a lot about Frederick Douglass. We do not hear enough about David Ruggles, and that will be changing here soon. You're looking at the pictures of what 73 Hempstead Street would have looked like at that particular time, and again, what it looks like today. Some of them have changed very drastically, as you can tell from the pictures, but they do have the plaques on them, so we do know who built them. There are 4 of the houses that exist today. There were 5 initially built. And so, you know, they have changed of some time. And right around the corner, just in that district, like Curtis mentioned earlier, is Shiloh Baptist Church, the home in Linwood Bland, 66 Hempstead Street, and the Prince Hall Masons. And there are plenty of other things. At the top of the street is the Ancientist Burial Ground. And along the way is actually where Civilian Haley would have had his home. So it's, you know, fascinating stuff. This is a picture of Sadie Dillon Harrison, and we love to talk about her. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the Green Book, but Sadie Dillon Harrison was actually the first and only, wrote the first and only precursor to the Green Book. It was called the Hackley and Harrison's Hotel and Apartment Guide for Colored Travelers. And it existed in the 1930s, well before the Green Book that we're all familiar with Victor Hugo Green. And so what a fascinating woman to have, and her family is actually very prominent. They're from Philadelphia. I think her mother was, I want to say she was an African-American doctor. I don't remember that detail quite well, but she comes from quite the prominent family. And there was a lot that she did, and there are still things that we're finding out about this amazing woman. So thank you guys for letting me share a little bit of this history. I know it's not a full, complete history, but we hope to do more in the future. And I'm just very excited to be a part of this wonderful program.
Thank you, Nicole, for bringing us through some of those markers along our trail, and I'll bring you to one of our final stops before we get into our Q&A, or at least as you can see, there's so much that we can talk about for each of our markers, and more soon to come, which we'll talk about in a second. But trying to condense it in the time frame that we have, it's just like you kind of get overwhelmed, but also excited, because there's just so much incredible, profound history. And to Nicole's point, you know, we hear a lot about a lot of these historical figures that are printed in text, but there's so many local heroes that are national heroes in theory, or should be, but it's because we haven't done the due diligence to uncover these stories and then to make sure that they're told and they're publicized. So this is kind of the point of the New London Heritage Trail. So right now you're looking at the Middle Passage to New London, which was one of the last markers to be installed this past year. So the Speedwell docked in New London for several days after sailing to Middletown, Connecticut, where some of the Africans were sold on July 24th. Although this is the only documented voyage of the ship arriving in New London directly from Africa with enslaved African, slave traders often sailed through New London to Africa and the West Indies to purchase enslaved Africans and sell them throughout the Americas. Only reading excerpts from this plaque, because that part in particular just stands out to me. So much we learn in history or throughout life about the enslavement of people of color in down south, but we never talk about the northern and what part the northern part of the U.S. has played in slave trade, and how big of a slave port my own hometown city, where I served as city councilor and grew up, was instrumental in the slave trade, and we just don't talk enough about it. So super excited where this plaque stands is right in between 2 other markers, and you'll see in this next slide the Middle Passage marker that you see here, as well as the Amistad marker there on our historic Amistad Pier. I have so many plans for that pier in particular, just to make sure that that particular pier, when you step on it, you are enamored by the amount of history that's there. You're enamored by the stories, by reading the names. We're fortunate to have the names of the captives that were enslaved and made it to New London. That's actually the next marker that's going to be installed. I'll let that out here. In the next 2 weeks, that marker will go up with each of the names that we have recorded that made it off of that boat, which is just super profound to me. You'll see this picture here. This is from our marker dedication. In the middle, you'll see the Amistad Pier, where myself and Nicole are in between the Middle Passage marker and the Amistad marker. To the right, you'll see dancers that came in here. They were the most authentic African dancers I've ever experienced. The amount of culture, history, and knowledge that they brought to the city of New London was just incredible to be able to witness and to be able to be a part of. To the bottom left, you'll actually see my beautiful niece who is throwing one of the flowers. So we were fortunate enough, as I said, to have the names of those that were enslaved on that boat that actually made it here on the Speedwell, to New London. And as we read each of those names, youth, community members, and people who have no idea who each other are were able to drop flowers into the historic Pequot, also known as the Thames River, one by one as those names were written off. So it was just a incredible ceremony. Over to my right, we had Miss Mashantucket of the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation. She serves as Miss Mashantucket royalty, performing a traditional Eastern blanket dance. She also was able to be there to do a blessings of the land before we embarked in doing the actual ceremony. So just an incredible ceremony. Each marker typically gets a ceremony of this. The next one coming up, I'll also leak that here, is going to be July 9th. It's Sunday of our annual Sail Fest. We will be doing a ceremony for Baldwin, who was a drummer, an African drummer here, who was very instrumental in teaching African culture and African music to the youth of our community. So he'll get a ceremonial marker along the tour. So it's a ceremonial stop. We'll also be placing actual drums for the public to use that will be permanent drums that'll be installed in this park, as well as a ceremonial marker that'll be uniform to the markers that you see on the screen there. So what's up next? That's what everyone wants to know always, what's up next? Because, you know, the stories are not done being told and the work is never done. So what's up next is the Indigenous Stop. So we'll be telling stories with the Mashantucket Pequot, Mohegan Pequot tribal nations and being able to intertwine those stories. A lot of times we talk about these stories as if they're separate or it's a zero-sum game, but these stories, it goes back to that word of intersectionality. You can't tell one without telling the other, especially here in southeastern Connecticut, which was also known as Pequot territory. So I'd be remiss if I was to tell that story with leaving out the Pequot history and being of Indigenous descent. So we'll be adding some stops there, which I'm super excited, but I won't leak too much there, but you'll have to stay tuned to what we're doing here in New London. Up next also is signage. So we'll be adding a lot more signage. I'm going to be putting some signage in the historic district of Hempstead neighborhood. So we're putting billboard-like signs out there so people know that it's prominent, that we're here to stay, and that this history is here and you can come to these unique and historic communities. Audio narration will be done in the next few weeks. Every single stop on the trail will have a unique QR code that will take you directly to a page where you will have our local researchers being able to take you through this journey through auto narration. So instead of just reading the plaque, we want it to be immersive and for you to get that behind the scenes experience that you're kind of getting now for each of those stops. Also, I have a bunch of partnerships with places like the Mystic Seaport and so many other places, as well as schools, to develop resources and come up with personalized and customized tours. One thing big about this is you heard in the video that I played earlier when we were honoring the living history, which is known as Spencer Lancaster. I had mentioned within that video that how dare the schools not teach me this history, not teach me my history, to be able to inspire me, encourage me, and to also know that I come from the backs of some really prominent people that have built America. So with that being said, I cannot wait to start partnerships with the schools so that they can have this history. This is their history in their backyard. And I'd be remiss again if I did not share that history with them, but not just share, ensure that it's embedded in the fabric that they call their curriculum. More untold stories are going to be coming. It's a 16 marker stop tour now. When we're done, it'll probably be somewhere north of 20 to 25 stops. And then last but certainly not least, a big shout out and thank you to the Connecticut Freedom Trail. We have just received word that 4 of our markers so far are now being accepted and are part of the Connecticut Freedom Trail. So super excited for our stories to be intertwined with the Connecticut Freedom Trail and the partnerships that will come to fruition because of that. So thank you again to the Freedom Trail. So again, this is our Black Heritage Tour. You can go on to visitnewlondon.org, and it'll also be on my last slide where you can find out more information. You can stop at each of the sites virtually, or you can click on the map to take a tour in person down in New London. What better time to do it now where it's summer, the weather's great. Amistad, I just heard, is docked at our city pier. So what better way to get experience of history than visiting? So I definitely encourage you to visit it in person or to reach out to myself or Nicole if you'd love a local tour guide to do that with you. And as a final reminder, Black history is American history. American history is shared history, and we're excited to add our shared and untold component back to what we consider to be American history. So thank each and every one of you for coming out. Thank you, Nicole, for joining me and for being one of the local researchers. And thank you to the team that has put this presentation together.
Wow. Wow. That is just awesome. Thank you so very much. My pride swells. Thank you for your hard work and for your research. Before we get to the questions, can you tell us what those 4 sites are that has been added to the Connecticut Freedom Trail?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Nicole. I'm drawing a blank, but I know we have the Green Book site. Yep, we have Ichabod Peace. Remind me of the other 2. I'm drawing a blank.
We got the Fairweathers, and there's which I don't remember. I forgot the other one actually.
The Fairweathers, and I say that to say the plan is to have all of our sites that meet the criterias, which should be all of them for the Connecticut Freedom Trail to be in it. So we started with 4 to not overwhelm them with our great history. So just the 4 up now, and we plan to submit 4 more in increments of 4 until the full tour is adopted into the Connecticut Freedom Trail.
Yes, thank you so much. It was such a great day to be there to present you with the flag and the plaque at the Fairweather site. And I am so excited that your hard work is paying off and you're a part of the Freedom Trail, because this is what the Freedom Trail is about, telling those unsung stories and bringing light to those sites and places where that history was made. Nicole, when you was doing your presentation and when you said to Adam, "We will find you," girl, the pride on your face. I was like, oh my goodness, I could just see it. And
I
as
meant it.
Yes, and I felt it and I could see it. And as a historian, sometimes I get in my feelings. And when I get in my feelings, because I've uncovered a story or uncovered a part of something I didn't know about. What does that do to either of you can answer? But what does that do to you when you're doing this type of research and you're finding that affirmation that, yes, I knew this or I didn't know this, and it just helps the story become much more combined?
Curtis, I think it's good for you to start because the way you learned about Ichabod Peas was,
right.
Yeah.
You feel lucky. And like now, I get this feeling right now where I just get this chill that runs through my body. If you've ever done great work and you become prideful and you consider it your life's purpose, that's the feeling you get when you're doing this work. It's your purpose. There's no way for us not to feel that way. It's our history. It's untold stories. It's these heroes that we're being able to give them their flowers, if you will. So to be able to be a part of telling these stories is absolutely fascinating, incredible. And it's the most inspiring thing I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, and for me, it's one of those things where, how they mention, the last time your name is spoken on earth. For me, it's bringing somebody back to life that may have been lost to history forever. And yes, we have some of these people are in books and in the city records, and that's how we find out. But if we're not down there looking for these things and people are not interested, my kids have been interested because I've been dragging them everywhere for 20 years. I have to do that. And for me, it's we all know what the ugly cry is like, right? Like we all know what that's like. Every time I find something like that, it's like, that's what I mean. And when I said that about Adam, like that's what I mean when it comes to Hercules. We now have found more information on Hercules, and like that's what that feels like, is like you're bringing them home. Like you're bringing them home, like you're giving them a voice. Like somebody has to be the last one to say it, and we want people to do that for generations. So I think what Curtis said is exactly accurate. I think you do feel very lucky, and I know I do.
Yeah, it is a feeling of pride. It's a feeling of I'm not worthy, but at the same time, I'm glad that I discovered this. I'm glad I'm a part of this. And it also gives you a sense of where you come from. You know what I mean? It's like they always say you don't know where you're going until you know where you come from. And when you reach back into history and you dig around in those roots and you find that information in that tree that connects you to your heritage and to your past, it makes a big difference. And you sort of feel like you have a full circle moment. So I'm definitely there with both of you on that. Let's see. We do have a question. Nicole, one of the questions is, why did Joan have to leave her children behind?
She was enslaved, plain as that. She had been enslaved on one property. Well, what it was is she had been enslaved at that time. The time that she had to leave her children behind, she had been freed and had to leave them at that point because her children, like I said, those Pardis laws of 1662 meant, and let me be very transparent about this, that law change was by design. We went by a paternalistic society to a, oh, well, if these women have these kids, you know, we're going to, if it goes by the father's, you know, birthright, now these children are going to be born free. They couldn't have that. So they changed that 1662 law and said, well, if these children are born to a Negro mother, now they have to be remained enslaved. So that's essentially what happened. Joan did temporarily, and I make that very clear, very temporarily gain her freedom, but she had to leave her children. And thankfully they were, you know, she was able to go back and nurse them. But could you imagine that 4-mile walk back and forth, having to leave your babies? I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's a difficult, it tugs at your heartstrings. Speaking about those laws in the islands, the children did follow the paternal line. So if the father was enslaved and he got his freedom, then the children had to remain enslaved. Whereas here in the colonies, if the children were born and the mother was enslaved, they would have to remain in slavery for perpetuity. But you're right, that's a tug at your heartstrings. She had to leave her children to go back to on her own home. So imagine the bittersweetness of it. I'm free, but my children are still there. I feel blessed that I get to go and see my children and feed them and do things, but I'm also torn because now I got to leave them again to go to my world of freedom, as short-lived as it was. So yes, that definitely tugs at the heartstrings. Let's see here. We have several questions. Joy Burns would like to know, is Ichabod Pease related to Aaron Pease, who was the cabin boy on the 1798 voyage of the Neptune from New Haven?
So I am not sure, but I am definitely curious now. You know, one of the most common misconceptions when it comes to history, especially locally, and I find this fascinating, you know, now we get around in boats and trains and cars, and but it's not far-fetched that he could have been related to somebody from New Haven. It's not far-fetched at all. Something that's interesting about when it comes to Pease and then it comes to John Jackson, you know, these names, it's like, well, where did those names come from? Because John Jackson just came up with his own name. It wasn't his enslaver's name or anything like that. So it is entirely possible, but I will not lie and tell you I know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. We have one from Mariana. What's a good place to start the walking self-guided tour, and is there an official start place?
So no official start place. Any stop is a good stop, to be honest. All Black history is great history, but I would recommend either doing two things. I'm dividing the tours into two. So you'll have the historic neighborhood of the Hempstead area. So there'll be quite a few markers just within that area that you're able to walk. Hopefully you'll contact Nicole in the Connecticut landmarks and check out the actual home that's there for Joshua, etc. And then you have the downtown aspect of the tour where you can then take a stroll along our waterfront and view 7 to about 10. Eventually in the next 4 months, there'll be about 15 to 20 markers in that area, including the indigenous aspect of the tour. So 2 different halves that you'll be able to split them in. So if you want to spend a full day in New London and attend our beautiful beaches and eat some good food, then you can do both. Otherwise, I would start either in the Hempstead district or just in downtown New London.
Awesome. Thank you. Rebecca says, have you been able to get funding for the signage? And is there a map of where all the signs are located?
That is a fantastic question because you got to follow the money. So on the map to find each of the sites, visit newlondon.org, www.visitnewlondon.org. You can find a map of all the sites and links to get more information on each marker, as well as pictures from each marker and news links. In terms of funding, so funding was a bit tough in the beginning. I absolutely had no plans or idea of how I was going to fund the first marker for Ichabod Pease. I just knew I was an ambitious city councilor that was going to find money to fund this plaque. Eventually, we were able to write grants through the help of Felix Reyes, which is our director of ODP, as well as Quinn and Harry, who handles marketing for the city. We were able to write some grants, and those grants were funded through the state of Connecticut. And we're able to get funding for the first initial 15 to 16 markers. Since leaving council, I started a cultural district commission. When ARPA funding came from federal government, I was able to fund the cultural district through the blessing of council and the mayor, of course, nearly $500,000. So we had that to indulge in cultural activities, art activities, etc. So it's really a combination of the community, right timing, and just really using our best grant writers to get grants in.
Awesome. Alex says, great job. She enjoyed the program. Marta says, I lived in the London area for 15 years and had no knowledge of this tremendous history. Thank you so much for helping us see and to learn and to grow. Blessings. Thank you, Marta. That was very kind.
Really appreciate that.
Terry says, how did you fund the beautiful plaques at each stop?
So that funding again came through that grant that we got, that matching grant. So the city had to put up the first initial funding, which was, I believe, about $15,000, and then we got that matching grant, which brought the total to $30,000. And then through ARPA, I was able to get a few more dollars through there. But moving forward, I plan to visit places like the Connecticut Humanities, et cetera, to really make sure I can bring in the money to be able to drive these stories. Clearly, these story tells themselves, and you can tell just from that beautiful comment that we just got how profound this walking trail is and how necessary, vital, and needed it is for our youth. So I'm super excited to go ask for more money to be able to uncover many, many more stories.
Awesome. Thank
If I can just say one thing, and I just want to add one thing to this whole thing, is that this was kismet. Like it was like Curtis mentioned in the beginning, asking me to come. When Curtis asked me to be his treasurer, I was like, what is he thinking? Like it was the most random thing. But it was like when our history is beautiful. First of all, we've always been a beautiful people. It is hidden in plain sight. It's right in front of our faces. And when it's meant to shine, it's going to shine. Like that's, Curtis is highly ambitious. But the thing about it was, and I don't think I've ever really said this to Curtis, is that I just trusted Curtis because I know Curtis. And I was like, I trusted it. I was like, it's going to go where it's going to go. And I didn't know where it was going, but when it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And that I'm grateful to be a part of this for that particular reason, because when the stories are going to be told, like I said, the story will tell itself, and these people don't want to be hidden anymore, and they're not.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Cannot hide anymore. Another question is from Ariana. What advice do you have for anyone wanting to do similar projects in their hometown?
Fantastic question again. So my advice would be partnerships. I don't know if you've seen that collaboration is key slide, but I put that up there purposely because it does take collaboration. So I'm a huge proponent. I'm a huge advocate of if it's not broke, don't fix it. And if someone's doing it well, ask questions and then make it better and make it unique to your own experience. We already have a heritage trail with the components that are involved. One project that I've just started, and I guess I'm just letting everything out the bag on this presentation, is doing sister sites, what I call it. So communities who only are able to do one or just don't know where to get started are able to tie one marker in with ours to be able to have that one marker to be able to start that journey of them being able to have a full-fledged tour, but if not, of them being able to be part of a cohesive telling of our Connecticut history. So that's kind of the plan now. So I'd encourage you to reach out to myself or any of their local researchers to get in touch with me to be able to talk about what that really looks like. And the biggest thing is you have to ask yourself with intentionality behind it. What is it I actually want to do? Don't think about the funding. The funding will come if you have that level of internationally, if you have that international, cannot say that word for some reason right now.
Intentionality. We know where you're going.
All words. I'm always using it every day. Be intentional. Be intentional. So yeah, if you're intentional about what it is you want to do, the funding will absolutely come. And if you have smart partnerships and the time to do so, it'll definitely come. But happy to really indulge on where step one.
Awesome. And speaking of cohesion, the Heritage Trail, the work that you've done falls right in line with the Connecticut Freedom Trail. We're working on a narrative that is going to connect all of the Freedom Trail sites, that one narrative that tells the story of Connecticut. So as you're traveling from one end of the state or one side to the other of the state, you're going to see that connection and that cohesion of the history of Connecticut. And so it is very important that we as historians, as those of us who are, I like to call the gatekeepers, because for now we are the gatekeepers. There will be future gatekeepers, but we are the gatekeepers. It's up to us to make sure these stories are not only unveiled, but they're told correctly, and that they are told by those who represent that history. So it is time, like they say, for us to start telling our own story and taking back our narrative. So I thank you both so very much for your hard work and your dedication. I truly appreciate you both, and you know I'm a fan of both of you. So I thank you so very much for all that you do, and I appreciate you stopping by Conversations at Noon this month. If you were not able to see the entire program, or if you wanted to see it at another time, please visit the YouTube pages of the Old State House or the Connecticut Freedom Trail YouTube page. And as a reminder, we have upcoming programs on the Freedom Trail, Conversations at Noon. Tuesday, July 25th at noon, we will be speaking with a descendant, where we're continuing the descendant narrative, where we will talk to attorney Amina Merritt, who is a descendant of Venture Smith, and her program is entitled Not a Program or a Stranger Here. Then we have the continuation again into August 22nd at noon. We will be talking with genealogist, historian, and lover of all things Black history, Mr. John Mills, Enslaved for Life, re-examining Connecticut's Prince Mortimer with him. He has been doing a great job of uncovering awesome information that has been hidden for so long. And that is the purpose of the Conversations at Noon, uncovering all of this beautiful hidden treasures that should be seen and that should be known. And it's not just Black history. Again, it is American history. So thank you all so very much for tuning in. And until the next time.